What if there were a town in Germany where the entire population fits at one dinner table, where the ocean walks into the garden 20 or 30 times a year and leaves again by morning, where the church has been rebuilt 7 times since 1362, and where the school has stood empty for more than a decade, not closed, just waiting for a single child to be born. That town exists. 7 people live in it. Officially, it is the smallest municipality in the Federal Republic of Germany. It has a mayor. It has a council. Its election result is reported every time within minutes of the polls closing because there is no one left to count. This is Hallig Gröde. Not quite an island, not quite land. A raft of green marsh in the North Sea, 1 metre above the tide, with 2 small hills on it, and on those hills everything the 7 people own. The North Sea does not respect the arrangement. When the storm surges come, the whole marsh goes under, and the hills become islands within the island. The Germans have a phrase for it: land unter. Land under. So why does a place that the water keeps taking back still refuse to be abandoned? And what does it actually take to live on a piece of ground that floods, on average, twice a month? Look at the coast of Schleswig-Holstein, Germany's northernmost state, where the country meets Denmark and the land dissolves into the North Sea. Off that coast lies the Wadden Sea, a vast, shallow, tidal world of mudflats and channels that empties and fills twice a day. So large and so strange that it is protected as a national park and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And scattered across the German part of it are the Halligen, 10 small undiked marsh islands that are unlike anywhere else in Europe. There are 10 Halligen left in the German Wadden Sea: Langien, Hooge, Oland, Gröde, Nordstrandeschmoor, Sterug, Esteful, Hamburger Hallig, Norderug and Hebel, and only 7 of them are permanently inhabited, by roughly 230 people in total. Some, like Langien and Oland, are reached by a narrow-gauge railway on a causeway across the mudflats. Gröde has no causeway and no rails. It has the boat. Gröde is one of them. It covers about 2.52 square kilometres of salt marsh, meadow, ditches, sheep, and it rises on average 1 metre above sea level. 1 metre. There is no dike around it. There is no wall between the grass and the sea. The marsh simply ends and the mudflats begin, and at high tide the water is right there. The people live on 2 artificial hills called Warften, dwelling mounds built up over centuries so that the houses would stand above the floods. Nutswarft holds 4 houses. Kirchwarft holds the church and the school. That is the whole settlement: 2 mounds, a handful of buildings, a great deal of sky. The mainland is a boat ride away. The vessel Siedler runs from the small harbour of Schultziel to the Hallig, though not on a fixed timetable. Tides, weather and need decide when it sails. Since 1976 a cable under the mudflats has brought electricity, water and telephone from the mainland. Before that, the Hallig made its own light and caught its own rain. The scenery is a study in horizontals: grass, water, mud, sky, and the 2 mounds breaking the line like ships at anchor. In summer the marsh turns purple with sea lavender and the sheep graze to the water's edge. In winter, when the wind comes out of the northwest and the storm surge builds, the horizon disappears entirely, and the Hallig becomes what it fundamentally is: a raised place in the sea. That is when the 7 people go up their hills and wait. The North Frisian coast has a long memory of water. In January 1362, a storm surge remembered as the Groti Mandrenki, the great drowning of men, tore through this coastline, destroying towns, redrawing the map, and turning stretches of farmland into sea. It was one of the great catastrophes of medieval Europe, and it is the year from which Gröde counts its churches. Since that year, 7 churches have stood on this marsh. 6 were lost, to floods, to storms, to the slow surrender of ground that could not hold them. The 7th, St. Margarethen, was built in 1779 and has held its place on the Kirchwarft ever since. Inside it are the survivors of the earlier ones, a Renaissance altar from 1592, a triumphal cross carved around the year 1500, a baptismal font from 1705. The building is younger than its furniture. On a Hallig, that is how history works, the walls go, the treasures are carried up the hill. The Warften themselves are the other history. Every generation raised them a little higher, hauling earth and sod up the mounds so that the houses would stand above the next surge. The Halligen were once far more populous. Dozens of families, dairy farms, fishing, and the great floods of the 17th century, above all the Bashadi flood of 1634 that drowned thousands along this coast, taught them what the mounds were for. The Halligen once lived from more than sheep. Salt was boiled from the peat beneath the marsh. Men from these islands went whaling in the Arctic, and the mounds carried farms and families in numbers that seem impossible today. The old trades died, and with them the reasons for a large population to endure the floods. Over the 20th century the population drained away, as it did from every hard place in Europe. Farming shrank to a few sheep and cattle. Families left for the mainland, for the cities, for lives that did not depend on the tide table. What was once a village became a hamlet, and what was once a hamlet became 7 people and a church. But the state kept the Hallig. Not out of sentiment, out of physics. The Halligen break the force of the North Sea before it reaches the mainland dikes. They are natural wave breakers, and their marshes and mudflats are the heart of a protected sea. Keeping people on them, keeping the mounds maintained and the marsh grazed, is part of how the coast defends itself. The 7 people of Gröde are in a real sense on duty, which is why the arithmetic of the place is not quite as fragile as it looks, and why the schoolhouse still stands. The number changes almost year to year. 7 inhabitants at the end of 2024. 6 at the end of 2025. 11 in an earlier count. On Gröde, one family moving is a demographic event. They live on the 2 mounds, in houses built with the water in mind, raised, solid, with the important rooms upstairs and the important animals nearby. Since 1976 they have had mains electricity, mains water and a telephone line, all of it running under the mudflats from the mainland. They have a boat and a harbour channel. They have the Seedler when it comes. They have sheep, some cattle, and a small tourism trade, day visitors and summer guests who come to see the marsh, the church and the 7. And they have land unter. 20 to 30 times in an ordinary year, a storm tide pushes the North Sea up over the marsh, and the entire Hallig disappears except for the 2 mounds. The sheep and cattle are brought up onto the Warften, the boats are secured, the gates are closed on the mound top fences that exist for exactly this. And then the people watch from the windows of Knutswarft and Kirchwarft as the sea covers the meadow, the ditches, the paths, and comes to the foot of the hills. Most of the time it stops there. The mounds were built for it. By the next tide the water drains back through the channels, the marsh reappears grey and flattened, and life resumes, sheep down, gates open, boat freed. In winter this happens so often that it stops being an emergency and becomes weather. Newcomers find it terrifying. The 7 find it Tuesday. The residents' main employment today across the Halligen is exactly what the state needs from them: coastal protection and tourism. Maintaining channels, dikes on the mounds and the marsh itself is paid work, hosting summer guests is the rest. And the marsh grows, each land unter leaves a thin layer of sediment, and over decades the Hallig builds itself upward. Which is why the state has begun a programme of raising the Warften still higher, an Auffortung against a sea that is rising faster than the marsh can. Governance is real and slightly absurd. Gröde is a full municipality of the Federal Republic, the smallest of them all, with its own mayor, currently Volker Mommsen, and it belongs to the Amt Pellworm, the joint administration of the neighbouring islands. It votes in every German election, and because it is the smallest electoral district in the country, its result is often the first reported in the entire nation, practically the moment the polls close. In the 2013 federal election, Every single resident voted by post. There was no need to open a polling station for 7 people. The school on the Kirchwarft is the most eloquent building on the Hallig. It has been empty since 2012. It has not been closed. The rule is simple. When a child of school age lives on Gröde, the school opens and a teacher is sent. When there is none, it waits. It has waited more than a decade. It is, in a real sense, a promise made in brick that if a family with children ever chooses this life, the state will meet them on the mound. Work is what the Hallig gives, the animals, the marsh, the maintenance of the mounds and channels, the guests, and the paid coastal protection duties that keep a few people on each Hallig year-round. Nobody gets rich. Everybody knows exactly what tomorrow's tide will be. 7 people, 20 to 30 floods a year, 1 church, 1 silent school. That is the whole economy. And yet the church still holds services, and the guests still come, because there is something here that the mainland lost. The Halligen have their own culture, shaped by centuries of living without a dike. It is a culture of preparation and patience. You do not fight the sea here, there is nothing to fight it with. You build up, you go up, you wait, you come down. The German word for the flood, unter, is not a cry of alarm on the Halligen. It is a status report. Saint Margarethen is the centre of that culture, as it has been since 1779. A church for 7 people is not a church in the usual sense. It is a memory keeper, a landmark, the place the boat steers toward and the storm is watched from. Its Renaissance altar and its 500-year-old cross have been carried out of 6 previous buildings. To rebuild the church 7 times on the same mound is a statement no one on Gröde needs to make out loud. Visitors who come for a day get a specific tour, the boat from Schultziel, the walk across the marsh on the raised path, the church on its mound with the altar carried out of 6 earlier churches, coffee and cake at one of the houses, and, if the tide is right, the sight of the sea coming in across the meadow while the sheep drift up toward the Warften as they have been taught. Then the boat back, when it comes. On the mainland the day is a curiosity. On the Hallig it is the standard operating procedure of a place that has been quietly negotiating with the North Sea for 700 years. Food is the food of the North Sea coast, lamb from the marsh, fish, the dark bread and strong tea of the Frisians. Hospitality is real, because guests are rare and welcome. A family that hosts summer visitors on a Hallig is running the local economy single-handed. There is a specific Hallig humour too, the humour of people who live in the smallest town in Germany, are counted in the national census as a rounding error, and are still, every 4 years, the first result on the evening news. Gröde has a mayor for 7 citizens and a council that could meet in a kitchen. It takes the arrangement seriously and finds it funny at the same time. And there is the sky. On the mainland, people talk about the weather. On the Hallig, the weather is the landscape. It decides where you can walk, whether the boat comes, whether the sheep sleep on the meadow or the mound. Everyone here reads the barometer the way city people read the news. That intimacy with the sea is beautiful. It is also the reason so few people are willing to live like this. Gröde sits inside one of the richest ecosystems in Europe. The Wadden Sea National Park protects the tidal flats around it, a nursery for fish, a pantry for millions of migratory birds that stop here on the way between the Arctic and Africa. A landscape that is land at low tide and sea at high tide, twice a day, forever. The Hallig itself is salt marsh, a plant community that survives being drowned in seawater dozens of times a year. Sea lavender, sea aster, the tough grasses the sheep eat. Every flood leaves a film of sediment behind, and that sediment is how a Hallig grows. Slowly, floods permitting, the marsh builds itself upward. Land unter is not only a threat, it is the mechanism by which the island has stayed above the sea for 7 centuries. Birds are the great spectacle. In spring and autumn the mudflats around Gröde fill with waders and geese in numbers that darken the sky, a passing population that dwarfs the human one by tens of thousands to one. The Hallig's few residents live in the middle of one of the largest bird migrations on the planet, and they see it from their kitchen windows. The tides govern the light. Twice a day the flats between Gröde and the mainland empty, and the horizon fills with brown mud, channels of silver water, and the small dark shapes of birds feeding. Twice a day it fills, and the Hallig floats again on a sea that reaches to the sky. Nowhere else in Germany does the landscape change so completely, so predictably, so often, and nowhere else do so few people live inside the change. Then there is the water itself, in its two moods, the calm summer sea, glittering to the horizon, sheep grazing at its edge, and the winter surge, brown and fast, covering everything but the mounds. Same sea. Same island. The difference is a few hours of wind. The first challenge is the count. 6 or 7 people is not a community that can absorb a loss. One family leaving would halve the Hallig. One death, one illness, one decision to retire to the mainland, each is an existential question. The empty school is the honest symbol. Gröde is a place with a future only if someone young chooses it. The second is the sea. 20 to 30 floods a year is the historical average. As the North Sea rises and storms intensify, the question is not whether the Halligen will flood, they always have, but whether the mounds can be raised fast enough and the marsh can build itself fast enough to keep pace. Germany invests in the Halligen because it needs them. Whether investment can outrun water is a question no one has answered. The third is isolation of the ordinary kind. A boat with no timetable, medical care a crossing away, winter weeks when the Seedler cannot sail and the mudflats are neither land nor sea, groceries planned around tides. For the 7, this is normal. For anyone considering joining them, it is the whole question. And yet the Hallig has answers that most dying villages do not. It has a purpose the state pays for. It has a landscape people travel to see. It has a church that has been rebuilt 7 times by people who could have simply left, and did not. When outsiders ask why anyone lives on Gröde, the residents' answer tends to be a shrug toward the horizon, as if to say, look at it. The mainland has dikes and safety and neighbours. Gröde has the sea in the garden and the sky in the kitchen. Some people, it turns out, want that more. Come to Gröde on a winter evening when the surge is running. The marsh is gone, the ditches are gone, the paths are gone. Only 2 hills remain in a brown, moving sea, one with 4 houses, one with a church and a silent school. And in the windows, lights, 7 people, warm and dry and entirely surrounded by the North Sea, doing what their neighbours on this mound have done since 1362, waiting for the water to go back where it came from. By morning it will. The sheep will come down, the boat will float. The marsh will be grey and shining, and a little bit higher than it was. Gröde is not just a village, it is a reminder that a home does not need to be dry to be worth defending, and that the smallest place in a country can still be the first to say what it thinks.